looks like I'm live. I mean, the YouTube thing looks like the video is live. I don't particularly look or feel alive at the moment. But yeah, we've got two people in here and I can recap. Hey, I can recap the beginning, sort of. Not really. I think people pretty much know what's up by now. I'm just going to wait a little bit. Laura has just had the most terrifying nightmare, which was just of a panther walking around her room, which, like, baby's first nightmare, but okay. And yeah, this story is way gayer than I thought. It's pretty good. It's great. I talked to my nan today, and she's still kind of urging me to find a nice girl and settle down, and I keep having to tell her, Nana, I'm not gay. I wish I were. I imagine not many people actually sympathize with me on that one. Oh, my aunt is too understanding. All right. We got a few. Doesn't matter. I'd read it for one. Carmilla, Part 3, Chapter 7. And this is right after Laura's had the terrifying dream about the Black Panther in her bedroom. Chapter 7, Descending. It would be vain my attempting to tell you the horror with which even now I recall the occurrence of that night. The dream about the panther. It was no such transitory terror as a dream leaves behind it. It seemed to deepen by time and communicated itself to the room and the very furniture that had encompassed the apparition of the panther. Just to recap. I could not bear next day to be alone for a moment. I should have told Papa, but for two opposite reasons. At one time, I thought he would laugh at my story. I could not bear its being treated as a jest. And at another, I thought he might fancy that I had been attacked by the mysterious complaint which had invaded our neighbourhood. I had myself no misgiving of the kind, and as he had been rather an invalid for some time, I was afraid of alarming him. And, recap, the mysterious contagion is all the hottest girls of the villages around the castle are being vampired to death. Is it by the mysterious lesbian vampire called Carmilla? We know, but Laura doesn't. I was comfortable enough with my good-natured companions, Madame Perrodon and the vivacious Mademoiselle La Fontaine. They both perceived that I was out of spirits and nervous, and at length I told them what lay so heavy at my heart. Mademoiselle laughed, but I fancied that Madame Perrodon looked anxious. By the by, said Mademoiselle, laughing, the long lime tree walk behind Carmilla's bedroom window is haunted. Nonsense, exclaimed Madame, who probably thought the theme rather inopportune. And who tells that story, my dear? Martin says that he came up twice when the old yard gate was being repaired before sunrise, and twice he saw the same female figure walking down the lime tree avenue. So he well might, as long as there are cows to milk in the river fields, said Madame. Yeah, it's a person, it's not. I dare say, but Martin chooses to be frightened, and never did I see fool more frightened. You must not say a word about it to Carmilla, because she can see down that walk from her room window, I interposed, and she is, if possible, a greater coward than I. Who was walking on the lime tree walk outside Carmilla's window at night? She's not a detective. Carmilla came down rather later than usual that day. I was so frightened last night, she said, so soon as we were together, and I'm sure I should have seen something dreadful if it had not been for that charm I bought from the poor little hunchback whom I called such hard names. I had a dream of something black coming round my bed, and I awoke in a perfect horror, and I really thought for some seconds I saw a dark figure near the chimney-piece. But I felt under my pillow for the charm, and the moment my fingers touched it, the figure disappeared, and I felt quite certain, only that I had it by me, that something frightful would have made it its appearance, and perhaps throttled me, as it did those poor people we heard of. And Laura's falling for this because she's super into Carmilla. Well, listen to me, I began, and recounted my adventure. And had you the charm near you? She asked earnestly. No, I had dropped it into a china vase in the drawing room, but I shall certainly take it with me tonight, as you have so much faith in it. At this distance of time, I cannot tell you, or even understand, how I overcame my horror so effectually as to lie alone in my room that night. I remember distinctly that I pinned the charm to my pillow. I fell asleep almost immediately, and slept even more soundly than usual all night. Next night I passed as well. My sleep was delightfully deep and dreamless. But I wakened with a sense of lassitude and melancholy, which, however, did not exceed a degree that was almost luxurious. Well, I told you so, said Carmilla, when I described my quiet sleep. I had such delightful sleep myself last night. I pinned the charm to the breast of my nightdress. It was too far away the night before. I am quite sure it was all fancy, except the dreams. I used to think evil spirits made dreams, but our doctor told me there's no such thing. Only a fever passing by, or some other malady, as they often do, he said, knocks at the door, and not being able to get in, passes on with that alarm. And what do you think the charm is? Said I. It has been fumigated or immersed in some drug, and is an antidote against the malaria, she answered. Then it acts only on the body. Certainly. You don't suppose that evil spirits are frightened by bits of ribbon or the perfumes of a druggist's shop. No, these complaints, wandering in the air, begin by tying the nerves, and so infect the brain. But before they can seize upon you, the antidote repels them. That, I am sure, is what the charm has done for us. It is nothing magical. It is simply natural. I should have been happier if I could have quite agreed with Carmilla, but I did my best, and the impression was a little losing its force. Some nights I slept profoundly, but still every morning I felt the same lassitude, and a languor weighed upon me all day. I felt myself a changed girl. A strange melancholy was stealing over me, a melancholy that I would not have interrupted. Dim thoughts of death began to open, and an idea that I was slowly sinking took gentle and somehow not unwelcome possession of me. If it was sad, the tone of mind which this induced was also sweet. Whatever it might be, my soul acquiesced in it. I would not admit that I was ill. I would not consent to tell my papa or have the doctor sent for. Being vampired and you're a little bit depressed, Laura. Publics the panther. Carmilla became more devoted to me than ever, and her strange paroxysms of languid adoration more frequent. She used to gloat on me with increasing ardour the more my strength and spirits waned. This always shocked me like a momentary glare of insanity. Without knowing it, I was now in a pretty advanced stage of the strangest illness under which mortal ever suffered. There was an unaccountable fascination in its earlier symptoms that more than reconciled me to the incapacitating effect of that stage of the malady. This fascination increased for a time, until it reached a certain point when gradually a sense of the horrible mingled itself with it, deepening, as you shall hear, until it discoloured and perverted the whole state of my life. The first change I experienced was rather agreeable. It was very near the turning point from which began the descent of Avernus. Certain vague and strange sensations visited me in my sleep. The prevailing one was of that pleasant, peculiar cold thrill which we feel in bathing when we move against the current of a river. This was soon accompanied by dreams that seemed interminable, and were so vague that I could never recollect their scenery and persons, or any one connected portion of their action. But they left an awful impression, and a sense of exhaustion, as if I had passed through a long period of great mental exertion and danger. Yeah, pretty much. After all these dreams, there remained on waking a remembrance of having been in a place very nearly dark, and of having spoken to people whom I could not see, and especially of one clear voice, of a female's, very deep, that spoke as if at a distance, slowly, and producing always the same sensation of indescribable solemnity and fear. Sometimes there came a sensation as if a hand was drawn softly along my cheek and neck. Sometimes it was as if warm lips kissed me, and longer and more lovingly as they reached my throat, but there the caress fixed itself. Laura's got no idea. My heart beat faster. My breathing rose and fell rapidly and full drawn. A sobbing that rose into a sense of strangulation supervened and turned into a dreadful convulsion in which my senses left me and I became unconscious. I want to tell Laura this, but I think she just invented the female orgasm. Nothing to do with being vampired. It was now 3 weeks since the commencement of this unaccountable state. My sufferings had, during the last week, told upon my appearance. I had grown pale, my eyes were dilated and darkened underneath, and the languor which I had long felt began to display itself in my countenance. My father asked me often whether I was ill, but with an obstinacy which now seems to me unaccountable, I persisted in assuring him that I was quite well. In a sense, this was true. I had no pain. I could complain of no bodily derangement. My complaint seemed to be one of the imagination, or the nerves, and horrible as my sufferings were, I kept them with a morbid reserve very nearly to myself. It could not be that terrible complaint which the peasants called the opium, but I had now been suffering for 3 weeks, and they were seldom ill for much more than 3 days when death put an end to their miseries. Yeah, that's the only reason it couldn't be a vampire. Carmilla complained of dreams and feverish sensations, but by no means of so alarming a kind as mine. I say that mine were extremely alarming. Had I been capable of comprehending my condition, I would have invoked aid and advice on my knees. The narcotic of an unsuspected influence was acting upon me, and my perceptions were benumbed. I am going to tell you now of a dream that led immediately to an odd discovery. One night, instead of the voice I was accustomed to hear in the dark, I heard one sweet and tender, and at the same time terrible, which said, "Your mother wants you to beware of the assassin." At the same time, a light unexpectedly sprang up, and I saw Carmilla, standing near the foot of my bed in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet in one great stain of blood. I wakened with a shriek, possessed with the one idea that Carmilla was being murdered. I remember springing from my bed, and my next recollection is that of standing on the lobby crying for help. Madame and Mademoiselle came scurrying out of their rooms in alarm. A lamp burned always on the lobby, and seeing me, they soon learned the cause of my terror. I insisted on our knocking at Carmilla's door. Our knocking was unanswered. It soon became a pounding and an uproar. We shrieked her name, but all was vain. We all grew frightened, for the door was locked. We hurried back in panic to my room. There we rang the bell long and furiously. If my father's room had been at that side of the house, we would have called him up at once to our aid. But alas, he was quite out of hearing, and to reach him involved an excursion for which we none of us had courage. Servants, however, soon came running up the stairs. I had got on my dressing gown and slippers meanwhile, and my companions were already similarly furnished. Recognizing the voices of the servants on the lobby, we sallied out together, and having renewed as fruitlessly our summons at Carmilla's door, I ordered the men to force the lock. They did so, and we stood, holding our lights aloft in the doorway, and so stared into the room. We called her by name, but there was still no reply. We looked around the room. Everything was undisturbed. It was exactly in the state in which I had left it on bidding her good night, but Carmilla was gone. Now Laura, being extremely bright and intuitive, is very afraid for Carmilla. Her mother in heaven is probably thinking, what clearer dream could I possibly send this girl? At some point you give up, right? And now, chapter 8, Search. At the side of the room, perfectly undisturbed except for our violent entrance, we began to cool a little, and soon recovered our senses sufficiently to dismiss the men. It had struck Mademoiselle that possibly Carmilla had been wakened by the uproar at her door, and in her first panic had jumped from her bed and hid herself in a press or behind the curtain, from which she could not, of course, emerge until the major domo and his myrmidons were withdrawn. We now recommenced our search and began to call her name again. It was all to no purpose. Our perplexity and agitation increased. We examined the windows, but they were secured. I implored of Carmilla, if she had concealed herself to play this cruel trick no longer, to come out and to end our anxieties. It was all useless. I was by this time convinced that she was not in the room, nor in the dressing room, the door of which was still locked on this side. At this point, she's convinced that Carmilla isn't in the room. I mean, and you got to remember the others are still looking. Laura's not even the dumbest person in that room. Dressing room, the door of which was still locked on this side. She could not have passed it. I was utterly puzzled. Had Carmilla discovered one of those secret passages which the old housekeeper said were known to exist in the Schloss, although the tradition of their exact situation had been lost? A little time would no doubt explain all, utterly perplexed as, for the present, we were. It was past 4 o'clock, and I preferred passing the remaining hours of darkness in Madame's room. Daylight brought no solution of the difficulty. The whole household, with my father at its head, was in a state of agitation next morning. Every part of the chateau was searched. The grounds were explored. No trace of the missing lady could be discovered. The stream was about to be dragged. My father was in distraction. What a tale to have to tell the poor girl's mother on her return. I, too, was almost beside myself, though my grief was of quite a different kind. They're girlfriends of each other, it's nice. The morning was passed in alarm and excitement. It was now 1 o'clock, and still no tidings. I ran up to Carmilla's room and found her standing at her dressing table. I was astounded. I could not believe my eyes. She beckoned me to her with her pretty finger in silence. Her face expressed extreme fear. I ran to her in an ecstasy of joy. I kissed and embraced her again and again. I ran to the bell and rang it vehemently, to bring others to the spot who might at once relieve my father's anxiety. Dear Carmilla, what has become of you all this time? We have been in agonies of anxiety about you, I exclaimed. Where have you been? How did you come back? Last night has been a night of wonders, she said. For mercy's sake, explain all you can. And go slow, because I'm Laura. I actually want Laura to get vampired, but, more. It was past 2 last night, she said, when I went to sleep as usual in my bed with my doors locked, that of the dressing room and that opening upon the gallery. My sleep was uninterrupted and, so far as I know, dreamless, but I woke just now on the sofa in the dressing room there, and I found the door between the rooms open and the other door forced. How could all this have happened without my being wakened? It must have been accompanied with a great deal of noise, and I am particularly easily wakened. And how could I have been carried out of my bed without my sleep having been interrupted? I, whom the slightest stir startles. By this time, okay, I'm just going to take a second here because I cannot believe they didn't search the little dressing room. It seems implied that they did. Why, you forced that door that was locked. There's another door with a little cupboard, which you just left. And then Carmilla comes out of the little room with the little cupboard, and you go, this is crazy. It's the craziest thing that's ever happened to anyone. Although, actually, this is 19th century stereo, so it probably is. Being a little bit harsh. Oh my god. Laura. Today's chapter has been brought to you by water, which sucks. No, no thank you. By this time, Madame, Mademoiselle, my father, and the number of servants were in the room. Carmilla was, of course, overwhelmed with inquiries, congratulations, and welcomes. She had but one story to tell, and seemed the least able of all the party to suggest any way of accounting for what had happened. Nope. Laura. Oh, I don't know what Hogwarts house Laura would be in because they don't have a specific house for true dummies. Real doofus hours, honestly. Camilla's adventure being locked in the small adjoining room. My father took a turn up and down the room, thinking. I saw Carmilla's eye follow him for a moment with a sly, dark glance. Is Carmilla's story about being locked in her dressing room not true? Why wouldn't it be? Yeah, Gryffindor. She's brave, but an idiot. Makes sense. When my father had sent the servants away. Yes, the sorting hat turns into a big dunce cap. And, on occasion, it touches the hair on a child's head and then it just eats them right down. It's pretty horrifying. No one likes that it does this, but it's the price of having a magical hat. So, and the other kids at Hogwarts don't have that long, that great a life expectancy. Better to be eaten by a hat on your first day, probably. When my father had sent the servants away, Mademoiselle having gone in search of a little bottle of valerian and sal volatile, and there being no one now in the room with Carmilla except my father, Madame, and myself, he came to her thoughtfully, took her hand very kindly, led her to the sofa, and sat down beside her. Will you forgive me, my dear, if I risk a conjecture and ask a question? Who can have a better right, she said. Ask what you please, and I will tell you everything. But my story is simply one of bewilderment and darkness. I know absolutely nothing. Put any question you please, but you know, of course, the limitations Mamma has placed me under. And yeah, again, quick recap. Carmilla was left here, and her mother told Laura's father that for reasons that would make sense to him in time, probably, Carmilla is not going to tell him her surname or anything about her family. Which, again, used to be pretty normal. Limitations. It's like there's no aspartame in here at all. Perfectly, my dear child. I need not approach the topics on which she desires our silence. Now, the marvel of last night consists in your having been removed from your bed and your room without being wakened, and this removal having occurred apparently while the windows were still secured and the two doors locked upon the inside. I will tell you my theory and ask you a question. Carmilla was leaning on her hand dejectedly. Madame and I were listening breathlessly. Did you hear that? I did. Come on, sweetie. Little black panther just came in. Yes, exactly. How could... This is why it's such a horror story, because she is rich and white, and yet she's actually bad and you can't trust her. I know it's hard to understand. What are you doing? Come on. Come say hello. You gonna come say hello? Come. Look. She's being a bitch. Now, my question is this. Have you ever been suspected of walking in your sleep? Never, since I was very young indeed. But you did walk in your sleep when you were young. Yes, I know I did. I have been told so often by my old nurse. A locked room mystery would have blown these people's minds. They could not have handled Agatha Christie. Oh, don't knock shit over with your tail. Wish I had a tail. I'd knock all her shit over. Well, what has happened is this. You got up in your sleep, unlocked the door, and not leaving the key as usual in the lock, but taking it out and locking it on the inside. You again took the key out and carried it away with you to some one of the 25 rooms on this floor, or perhaps upstairs or downstairs. There are so many rooms and closets, so much heavy furniture and such accumulations of lumber that it would require a week to search this old house thoroughly. Do you see now what I mean? She was in the next room. I do, but not all, she answered. And how, Papa, do you account for her finding herself on the sofa in the dressing room, which we had searched so carefully? They did search the dressing room. Okay, now it makes slightly more sense how bewildered everyone is, but she came there after you had searched it, still in her sleep, and at last awoke spontaneously, and was as much surprised to find herself where she was as anyone else. I wish all mysteries were as easily and innocently explained as yours, Carmilla, he said, laughing. And so we may congratulate ourselves on the certainty that the most natural explanation of the occurrence is one that involves no drugging, no tampering with locks, no burglars or poisoners or witches, nothing that need alarm Carmilla or anyone else for our safety. Carmilla was looking charmingly. Nothing could be more beautiful than her tints. Tints. Her beauty was, I think, enhanced by that graceful languor that was peculiar to her. I think my father was silently contrasting her looks with mine, for he said, I wish my poor Laura was looking more like herself, and he sighed. So our alarms were happily ended, and Carmilla restored to her friends. That is a wonderful story about how Laura's dad just was like, wow, only one pretty girl in this room. Coming up nearly half an hour, but I think I want to read. Yeah, I'm going to read another chapter. I mean, I'm here anyway, and you haven't seen the cat yet, so there's still a chance she'll jump up. Chapter 9, The Doctor. As Carmilla would not hear of an attendant sleeping in her room, my father arranged that a servant should sleep outside her door, so that she would not attempt to make another such excursion without being arrested at her own door. The night passed quickly, and next morning early, the doctor, whom my father had sent for without telling me a word about it, arrived to see me. Doctor, my daughter's not pretty anymore. It sucks. Madame accompanied me to the library, and there the grave little doctor, with white hair and spectacles, whom I mentioned before, was waiting to receive me. I told him my story, and as I proceeded, he grew graver and graver. We were standing, he and I, in the recess of one of the windows, facing one another. When my statement was over, he leaned with his shoulders against the wall, and with his eyes fixed on me earnestly, with an interest in which there was a dash of horror. Oh, I know that look. After a minute's reflection, he asked Madame if he could see my father. He was sent for accordingly, and as he entered, smiling, he said, I dare say, Doctor, you are going to tell me that I am an old fool for having brought you here. I hope I am. Yeah, being gay for a vampire was, I mean, in the 19th century they thought it was an illness, but now we know that it's very cool and good. His smile faded into shadow as the doctor, with a very grave face, beckoned him to him. He and the doctor talked for some time in the same recess where I had just conferred with the physician. It seemed an earnest and argumentative conversation. The room is very large, and I and Madame stood together, burning with curiosity at the farther end. Not a word could we hear, however, for they spoke in a very low tone, and the deep recess of the window quite concealed the doctor from view, and very nearly my father, whose foot, arm, and shoulder only could we see, and the voices were, I suppose, all the less audible for the sort of closet which the thick wall and window formed. Come on then, don't just roll around on your back. Come here if you want attention. Yeah? I'm gonna show. You gonna come see the people? Cheating, really. People gonna give you trying to. Oh, there she goes. Yum treats. Yeah. Now we've got a bit of asthma going on. Yep, there are more there, darling. She is the Laura of my house. Luidora. There are a couple more. Nice. Yep, there's that one there. That's the last one. Good girl. Ah, I don't know why she insists on showing her bum to every. Doesn't matter what I have the webcam on for. She just. Don't do that, madam. It's rude. You don't get this with audiobooks. After a time, my father's face looked into the room. It was pale, thoughtful, and I fancied agitated. Laura, dear, come here for a moment. Madame, we shan't trouble you, the doctor says, at present. Accordingly, I approached, for the first time a little alarmed, for although I felt very weak, I did not feel ill, and strength, one fancies, is a thing that may be picked up when we please. Maybe you fancy that, I do not. My father held out his hand to me as I drew near, but he was looking at the doctor, and he said, It certainly is very odd. I don't understand it quite. Laura, come here, dear. This is the first time Laura is named, and, yeah. Now attend to Dr. Spielsberg and recollect yourself. You mentioned a sensation like that of 2 needles piercing the skin, somewhere about your neck, on the night when you experienced your first horrible dream. Is there still any soreness? None at all, I answered. Can you indicate with your finger about the point at which you think this occurred? Very little below my throat. Here, I answered. I wore a morning dress which covered the place I pointed to. Now you can satisfy yourself, said the doctor. You won't mind your papa's lowering your dress a very little. It is necessary to detect a symptom of the complaint under which you've been suffering. I acquiesced. It was only an inch or 2 below the edge of my collar. God bless me. So it is, exclaimed my father, growing pale. You see it now with your own eyes, said the doctor, with a gloomy triumph. What is it? I exclaimed, beginning to be frightened. Nothing, my dear young lady, but a small blue spot about the size of the tip of your little finger. And now, he continued, turning to Papa, the question is, what is best to be done? Is there any danger? I urged, in great trepidation. I trust not, my dear, answered the doctor. I don't see why you should not recover. I don't see why you should not begin immediately to get better. That is the point at which the sense of strangulation begins? Yes, I answered. And recollect as well as you can, the same point was a kind of centre of that thrill which you described just now, like the current of a cold stream running against you. Oh my God, Laura just described an orgasm to the doctor. Oh, that's so funny. It may have been. I think it was. Ah, you see, he added, turning to my father. Shall I say a word to Madame? Certainly, said my father. What are you doing? You little creep. Where are you going, Toad? Laura. He called Madame to him and said, I find my young friend here far from well. It won't be of any great consequence, I hope, but it will be necessary that some steps be taken, which I will explain by and by. But in the meantime, Madame, you will be so good as to not let Miss Laura be alone for one moment. That is the only direction I need give for the present. It is indispensable. If you've ever read Dracula, you know how hard it is to, not be alone. Okay, I should probably do Dracula next because it's a series of idiocy and fuck ups way worse than this. We may rely upon your kindness, madame, I know, added my father. Madame satisfied him eagerly. Sorry, I'm a child. And you, dear Laura, I know you will observe the doctor's direction. I shall have to ask your opinion upon another patient whose symptoms slightly resemble those of my daughter that have just been detailed to you. Very much milder in degree, but I believe quite of the same sort. She is a young lady, our guest, but as you say you will be passing this way again this evening, you can't do better than take your supper here, and you can then see her. She does not come down till the afternoon. I thank you, said the doctor. I shall be with you then at about 7 this evening. And then they repeated their directions to me and to Madame. And with this parting charge, my father left us and walked out with the doctor. And I saw them pacing together up and down between the road and the moat on the grassy platform in front of the castle, evidently absorbed in earnest conversation. Flora's scratching. We go outside now. Aren't you? The doctor did not return. I saw him mount his horse there, take his leave, and ride away eastward through the forest. Nearly at the same time, I saw the man arrive from Dranfield with the letters, and dismount and hand the bag to my father. In the meantime, Madame and I were both busy, lost in conjecture as to the reasons of the singular and earnest direction which the doctor and my father had concurred in imposing. Madame, as she afterwards told me, was afraid the doctor apprehended a sudden seizure, and that without prompt assistance I might either lose my life in a fit, or at least be seriously hurt. The interpretation did not strike me, and I fancied, perhaps luckily for my nerves, that the arrangement was prescribed simply to secure a companion who would prevent my taking too much exercise, or eating unripe fruit, or doing any of the 50 foolish things to which young people are supposed to be prone. I love the idea that back then people were like, 19th century millennial kids, always eating unripe fruit, running around exercising too much, drawing tiny self-portraits. About half an hour after my father came in, he had a letter in his hand and said, "This letter had been delayed. It is from General Spielsdorf. He might have been here yesterday. He may not come till tomorrow, or he may be here today." Bit of a recap. The general is a guy whose daughter was going to come and stay with Laura at the beginning. Laura was all excited about it because she's very lonely, apart from her dad in a castle full of servants. But then the general sent a letter saying, "Hey, we had a young female guest at our castle, and my daughter is dead, and I went mental, and now I'm a vampire hunter." So naturally, the next day, Carmilla shows up, and Laura's like, "Hooray, I will get a friend." Oh, honestly. He put the open letter into my hand, but he did not look pleased, as he used when a guest, especially one so much loved as the general, was coming. On the contrary, he looked as if he wished him at the bottom of the Red Sea. There was plainly something on his mind which he did not choose to divulge. "Papa, darling, will you tell me this?" said I, suddenly laying my hand on his arm and looking, I am sure, imploringly in his face. "Perhaps," he answered, smoothing my hair caressingly over my eyes. I don't know what you're picturing, but all I can see is her just shoving her face down with some hair, just putting that face away. "Does the doctor think me very ill?" "No, dear, he thinks, if the right steps are taken, you'll be quite well again, at least on the high road to a complete recovery in a day or two," he answered, a little dryly. "I wish our good friend the general had chosen any other time. That is, I wish you had been perfectly well to receive him." "But do tell me, Papa," I insisted. "What does he think is the matter with me?" "Nothing. You must not plague me with questions," he answered, with more irritation than I ever remember him to have displayed before. And seeing that I looked wounded, I suppose, he kissed me and added, "You shall know all about it in a day or two. That is all that I know. In the meantime, you are not to trouble your head about it. I think I will either say nothing about Laura's dad finding her asking about her own medical diagnosis irritating and presumptuous, or I could spend another 40 minutes just going off on it. So, yeah, not saying anything about that. He turned and left the room, but came back before I had done wondering and puzzling over the oddity of all this. It was merely to say that he was going to Carnston, and had ordered the carriage to be ready at 12, and that I and Madame should accompany him. He was going to see the priest who lived near those picturesque grounds upon business, and as Carmilla had never seen them, she could follow when she came down with Mademoiselle, who would bring materials for what you call a picnic, which might be laid for us in the ruined castle. And again, a little tiny recap. Carmilla looks exactly like a portrait of the Countess Mircalla Carnston, who's part of a family that went extinct ages ago, and their castle's been torn down. That's Carnston Castle. And if you were wondering, I know, right? It's like, how can you have knowledge in your brain and still get better? Just rest. Don't worry about it. It's being handled. So if you were wondering, which you shouldn't be by now, Mircalla is Carmilla rearranged. It's deeply clever, and it's still affecting people writing vampires today, which is fucking sad. At 12 o'clock, accordingly, I was ready, and not long after, my father, Madame, and I set out upon our projected drive. Passing the drawbridge, we turned to the right and followed the road over the steep Gothic bridge westward to reach the deserted village and ruined castle of Carnston. No sylvan drive can be fancied prettier. The road breaks into gentle hills and hollows, all clothed with beautiful wood, totally destitute of the comparative formality which artificial planting and early culture and pruning impart. The irregularities of the ground often lead the road out of its course, and cause it to wind beautifully around the sides of broken hollows and the steeper sides of the hills, among varieties of ground almost inexhaustible. Turning one of these points, we suddenly encountered our old friend the General riding toward us, attended by a mounted servant. His portmanteaus were following in a hired wagon, such as we term a cart. So does everyone, Laura. The General dismounted as we pulled up, and after the usual greetings, was easily persuaded to accept the vacant seat in the carriage, and sent his horse on with his servant to the Schloss. That is the end of that chapter. I think I'm going to wrap it up, but yeah, you're not a dummy for not unscrambling the names, because I'll type them in chat. My accent kind of gets rid of the R's. Mircalla. I don't really need to type out Carmilla, do I? Because it's the title, wherever the title is. Yeah. Right, I think I'm going to leave the next two videos for another day, because we're coming up on 3/4 of an hour. Oh, they love their anagrams, honestly. Thank you, Alexander, for being here. Thank you, John. Thank you, Father Dog. Thank you, lurking people who came in and out. Thank you, anybody who is watching this in the future, although not the far future, because I'm not into that. Yeah, exactly. When people can't read, you're still going by your real name, kind of, but you're tricking all the peasants. And you're tricking Laura, which is like tricking a potato. But yeah, thank you all. I'm sick, but this was still fun. And I'll see you all maybe tomorrow. Let's hope. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you go for the box and click on the fucking YouTube, man.